I'm Bal Bhatla, also known as Mr. Whisper. I'm a street photographer and also a Fujifilm ambassador. We're here in central London this evening for me to share some tips and tricks with you for low light photography. So if you've ever been interested or intrigued how to get into street photography by night, you're in the right place. I like to keep my setup very light and my kit that I keep with me. So basically I have one prime lens with me. Today I've got the 56 f1.2, which is perfect for low light conditions. And also I use this lens when I don't want to get too close to my subjects. So if I want to keep a safe distance, be able to get a lot of detail, this is the lens for that. Other than that, I've just got a couple of extra batteries. Barely ever need to use those because the batteries last pretty much all evening. And then on top of that, I have got a couple extra SD cards. Again, barely ever need to use those, but then you never know what's going to happen when you're in town. What I've left at home is my other prime lenses. I've got the 16mm, I have a 33mm, and I have a 23mm. Now, I wanted to stick with the 56 today because I'd only like to keep one prime lens with me because I don't want to come to a situation or a scene where I start thinking, oh, how can I recompose this, wasting time, and honestly, I'm probably going to miss the moment. So using one prime at a time for about 2 months really gets my eyes used to the focal length, and then I'll switch to another one. And that's whenever I'm shooting my personal stuff. When I use client work, obviously I'll come out with a much bigger bag and have a whole selection of my prime lenses, especially for low light. So I originally got into low light street photography when I made the transition from my smartphone to a big camera. And when I went to buy my first big camera, I was drawn immediately to the Fujifilm system. Mainly because I love the aesthetic, but the fact that it also had the main dials, like the exposure triangle on the top and not in a menu on screen. So whenever I'd go back home, I'd be able to see exactly why my photos were either too blurry or had too much noise in them. I could just look at the dials on top and see what I had been using in Lightroom and be able to adjust them next time. And this is how I became a low light connoisseur, essentially. I found that the night is what I was drawn to. I found that it was much more cinematic, and also the fact that people are a lot more relaxed at night and you get a lot more kind of motion and energy from people, and they're kind of a lot more real. And I think the fact that I was shooting low light and street photography is what drew Fujifilm to myself, and essentially is how I became an ambassador for them. Because it's a great way to showcase that their cameras can achieve amazing photos by night. So if they can do amazing photos by night, obviously they can do them in the daytime as well. So for my low light settings, I like to keep them very simple because really I want to keep my eyes on the street and I don't want to miss a moment. So a lot of people think that it's wrong to have any settings in auto, but basically I run most of my camera in aperture priority. So my shutter speed, I keep that at around 1/25 of a second or 1/250th of a second. I will have my ISO set to automatic, but I'll have that bracketed. So depending on how low the light gets, I'll try to keep that as low as possible. So it will be from 125 to 400 ISO, or the next step up will be, if it gets a little bit darker, it will be 400 to 800. And if I get into a very low setting, then it will go from 800 to 1600. Now, if I have to push it much higher than that, say 6400 is probably the highest I go to, because that's what my eye will see. If I end up having to go higher than that, I'll normally walk away from the scene because it's just going to require too much post-editing, basically. So those are the things that I like to do. And if I get to a spot and I know that the lights behind the subject are getting blown out, then all I have to do is adjust the aperture ring, which is why I'm shooting in aperture priority, so that I can quickly adjust those even when my face is behind the camera. to make sure that the lights are nicely exposed. So I like to keep my camera settings really simple because where I want my focus is to be on my eyes on the street so I don't miss a moment. So one of the things that I'm on the lookout for constantly is props and interesting details that people might have. It could be gloves, it could be hats, it could be umbrellas. And those always score extra points for street photographers, especially on social. Plus make the photos have a little bit more character and detail and somehow kind of timestamp the time that we're in. So, what I'm really drawn to here is the stained glass windows. I love the kind of patterns on them and the abstract nature of them, especially when you can see the silhouettes behind the window. So I'm waiting for like some interesting shapes or an interesting interaction so that when I get my photo, it's not going to be clear what you're seeing, but it's going to invite the viewer in to kind of complete the narrative or kind of guess what's going on. And that's what I really look for in most photos. So one thing that I was waiting for is normally at traffic lights, you'll always get someone who'll that last straggler who's like running across the street. And that always like, you get a really beautiful silhouette of them because of the headlights of the traffic basically. So you'll always catch me standing at traffic lights, looking for those moments that people can relate to really, and it makes for a bit more of an exciting photo. Okay, so I'm really drawn to these beautiful lights, these beautiful neon lights that are here in Soho. And what I'm doing is just trying to frame them in as many different ways as I can. So obviously there's the straightforward and the obvious shot, which is straight on, waiting for silhouettes to go past. And then there's also all the various reflections I can work with to make it a little bit more abstract and more interesting. So trying it through all the shot fronts and framing it through the little windows opposite makes it for a much more interesting composition than just shooting it straight on. So right here, I like the fact that there's this graffiti on the telephone box, and I'm using it to shoot through and focus on a subject through it because it gives it some nice foreground and some layers to work with. Also, I'm going to try and see if I can get this. There's a lady there with headphones. And yeah, we got her quite nicely actually. Yeah, I just like doing the subframing through the phone box. It's got these lovely little squares, the graffiti, just these layers that will add some nice details to the photo. So I'm really happy with that. So I love to frame people using London buses. They're such an iconic part of London, and they've got some beautiful framing that you can use. So being an ex-graphic designer, I love looking for the compositions within the red and the black borders, especially on the newer buses. So I'm always like sitting out, waiting for traffic jams to happen so that I can like casually walk past and get people while they're shooting. But yeah, they're really, really nice to shoot with. You get some really nice reflections. Lovely, lovely, nice. So one of the key things I look for when I'm out doing low light street photography is great natural light. So coming to Piccadilly Circus, they've got amazing natural light here in the environment, from the big screens to all the LED screens which are shining around. And also you get like incredible groups of people. There'll be people dancing. So I can get in between the crowds, use the light as a great source to make sure that people are well exposed. And basically I'm trying to frame people in between the crowd, subframing them between like legs or between shoulders, which makes for a much more interesting scene as well. So one big misconception with street photography that I wish I'd known earlier on in my career is that it's not as spontaneous as people think. The fact is, you can take your time. All you have to do is find the right frame that interests you, have a good light source, and then wait for an interesting subject to come along. So forget about it being spontaneous and set yourself up to make beautiful compositions. Okay, that's all for this evening, folks. I hope you enjoyed the tips and tricks and the little insights I gave you. I hope it's invited you to go out and try the nighttime and low light street photography yourself. Wex, thank you very much for having me. You can check out my socials in the description. Mr. Whisper over and out. Peace.